Check out this fun raised texture you can create on a t-shirt by screen printing with puff ink. Hey, it's Jennifer with Pigskins and Pigtails. Welcome back to my channel where I teach beginners how to get started screen printing at home using a simple setup. One of the reasons I love screen printing is the feel of the ink on the shirt. I typically screen print with water-based ink, which soaks into the fabric, leaving a permanent, smooth feel. But today, I'm going to show you one of the times that I will use Plastisol ink, and that is to get a raised effect with my prints using a puff additive. I've tested other puff additives with water-based ink in the past, but after wash testing and wearing shirts made with both types, I have found that the results with this Plastisol puff combination is far more superior. So I'm really excited to share this process with you. Choosing the right ink is key. This is the stuff that I have found works really well to get a nice puff that's gonna last in the wash. It's the Pigskins ink puff, and it's a low cure additive, which is also helpful for us home screen printers, and I'll talk more about that when I get to the curing process. This puff can be mixed with any color Plastisol ink. The Plastisol ink I'm using is the same brand, Pigskins ink. The instructions for this puff is to add 10 to 20% by weight to your Plastisol ink. It's important that you use a good kitchen scale for this process to make sure that your proportions are correct. I'll link to this one that I'm using below. I'm starting with 3 ounces of ink. This puff is very thick, but be sure to give it a stir first, and then I'm going to add 20%, which is 0.6 ounces. Now we need to stir this really well. To make sure you have a consistent puff across the print, you want to make sure that the puff is completely mixed into the ink. Now that our puff ink is all ready to go, it's time to grab our screen printing frame. Since this is a thicker ink and we want to get a nice amount through the screen, it's recommended that you use a screen mesh around 110. If you have my Pigskins and Pigtails screen or a wood speedball screen, these are both 110 mesh. The tension of your screen is extremely important here too. The tension on my screen is really high, which helps in getting a consistent, even print. I've added my design on the back of the screen using an adhesive vinyl that I cut on my vinyl cutting machine. This is another shortcut I use as a home screen printer that makes the process so much faster to set up compared to traditional screen printing emulsion. If you want to learn more about setting up the screen this way, be sure to watch my beginner video linked above, and I'll also leave it in the description below. To get the best results with your puff, I recommend using a screen printing press for this process. My Pigskins and Pigtails press that I'm using here is an affordable way to get set up at home. You can learn more about this press in my link below. When you set up your screen on your press, having a little bit of space between your screen and your shirt is going to allow you to apply a thicker deposit of ink, which will result in more puff. You can refer to my setup video, which comes with this press, to see how to adjust the spacing, which is called off contact. To get a consistent puff, you need to make sure that your ink is applied in even coats. So be sure to add plenty of ink along the top of your screen. It's better to have more than not enough. We'll be able to scoop up and save any excess at the end. I'm squeegeeing over this with a 70 durometer blade squeegee. This firmer blade is helpful in pushing the ink through the screen and making sure that the ink deposit is consistent across the entire print. Notice how the screen bounces back away from the shirt as my squeegee passes over it. This is because of the off-contact spacing I mentioned, and it's really helpful in getting that nice, even print. Unlike water-based inks, Plastisol ink does not air dry, so this ink is going to remain wet on the shirt until it's cured by reaching 260 degrees through the entire layer of ink. So let's talk about our options for curing. I've learned that this part is the key to what type of puff you end up getting. Ideally, this process works best with an industrial-sized conveyor dryer where you can control the heat and curing speed. But here in my home setup, I don't have room for one of those, so there are 2 options I recommend. The best bet is to use a flash dryer like this one. I was able to get the best results by putting the shirt under the flash. It's about 3 inches from the shirt, and I leave it for about 20 to 30 seconds, and you can see the puff action happen. To replicate that action of a conveyor dryer, I move the flash over the shirt a little bit to make sure the heat is getting evenly distributed. You have to watch the puff closely.
Once it is puffed, you want to make sure to remove the heat and check out how amazing this looks. This is dry so you can touch it and it's all done. This shirt is cured and ready to wash and wear. Now, if you don't have a flash dryer, you can use a heat gun. I have mine set to the highest temperature and I'm moving it over the ink. I did several shirts using a heat gun and it did work, but it can take a little practice to get this technique down just right. If this is the method you choose, you want to practice moving your heat gun over the print to get an even puff and to make sure that you cure every part of your design. Here's a look at a shirt I cured with my flash compared to a shirt cured with a heat gun. As you can tell, both of them puffed really nicely. They're really hard to tell apart, so with the right technique, both of these methods can work. After you finish printing, it's time to clean your screen and supplies. First, try to scoop up as much ink as you can off the screen and squeegee. Then remove the vinyl off the back of your screen, including any of the little pieces. Then you're going to need a special cleaner to get off the Plastisol. I'm using Supreme Wash that I will link to below. This stuff has a really strong smell, so I will typically do this outside. But you want to spray down the screen and then wipe it away with a paper towel. This is my least favorite part about using Plastisol ink and one of the reasons why I stick with water-based for most of my other printing projects. Repeat this a few times on both sides of the screen until you've removed all of the ink. I try to get off as much of the ink before removing the tape just to avoid getting ink in the corners of the frame, which is harder to get out. Once I get all of the ink off, I will rinse it down with a hose and let the screen air dry. So while this cleanup process isn't quite as easy, it's definitely worthwhile to get these fun results. I've washed these shirts many times. I just throw them in with my other clothes on a normal cycle and dry them on normal as well. I love that even after washing and drying, the puff is still holding up just as well as when I first printed it. I have noticed some minor cracking in a few of my prints, but the puff has not worn down at all. Using the flash dryer or heat gun method is going to take some testing. It's really easy to over-cure this ink. Once your ink puffs, if you leave it under the heat too long, the puff will start to collapse. You can see here where it reaches the peak of its puff, and then leaving it under the heat, it starts to collapse. And if I leave it even longer, it will collapse even more. Now there is still a raised texture feel to this one, but it's definitely not as puffy as the one that was cured just right. I started out using wood frames that didn't have as much tension. It's really hard to see when you're printing, but if you look in this area that didn't puff as well, I think this was because the ink wasn't printed as evenly because of the looser mesh. The frames I've linked below are the ones I recommend for getting the best results.
If you notice any uneven areas of puffing, that could be from not getting an even coat of ink with your squeegee. So this is something to practice and work on perfecting. Or it can also be from an uneven heating because again, we may not be using the most ideal equipment here. So keep testing out hovering your flash or using a heat gun. The variables like the distance you have the heat over your shirt and the actual temperature that it reaches are going to be major factors in the results that you get. Overall, for a home screen printer, I'm really happy with the results of this puff ink.
It's time to get creative. Now you can use this puff to create shirts like these. Using the same color ink on a sweatshirt with puff is really popular right now.
I can't wait to see what you make. If you try this process, be sure to tag me at Pigskins and Pigtails when you post on social media. For more on screen printing from home, be sure to check out my Pigskins and Pigtails screen printing press.
And subscribe to my channel so you don't miss my next video tutorial. And now that you're ready to use Plastisol ink, here are 2 more videos to watch. You can use Plastisol ink to make your own screen print transfers, and you can apply foil to t-shirts using Plastisol ink.